Epic Games, creators of Fortnite, Apple and Google's worst nightmare. This might sound a little crazy. Why is this game dev company suddenly challenging the biggest titans in all of technology and software? Well, there's some important reasons why. I feel like when people talk about Epic, they miss who Epic's real customers are. I'll give you a hint. They're not your little brother playing Fortnite and buying skins. Epic's core customers, the people that they've structured their whole company around, are game developers, not game players. Epic created Unreal Engine, which is the industry standard for doing 3D game development. If you're building a game with an interactive world that you can walk around in, there's a pretty high chance you're building that using Unreal Engine. And most of the biggest games nowadays are built in Unreal. Everything from obviously Fortnite to things you wouldn't expect like Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy. And even fighting games now like Soul Calibur and Tekken, all built in the same engine as Gears of War and Fortnite. Epic's focus on their game engine and iterating on it has allowed for us to move way faster as an industry, implementing crazy new graphics technologies like ray tracing, implementing new methods for loading in maps, making massive 100+ person multiplayer battle royales possible. A lot of these technologies and a lot of these innovations have to happen at an engine level. And when the industry starts to focus on specific engines and what they're capable of, we end up pushing much faster, similar to how we saw with the browser wars and Chrome becoming a standard. I feel like Epic's decisions are often misunderstood because people assume that they're just trying to squeeze every cent they can out of their Fortnite players, when in reality, they're trying to set themselves up for the long-term success of game developers, knowing that that will, in the end, bring them success too. What does any of this have to do with Apple and Google, though? Well, to understand that, we have to go back really far, back to the days where you would buy your software at a real store. Yes, I know it's crazy to think of now, but back when I used to work at Staples, one of our best-selling products was a physical copy of Windows that you would buy. Yes, you would show up at a store and buy your Windows Vista disk to go install on your custom-built computer. Crazy that you'd have to go buy a disk and a license from a physical retail store for a piece of software. But that was just the norm. And it took a long time for digital distribution of software to become a standard. One of the things that really pushed that was the App Store on iPhone. While Apple initially promised that the web would be enough and HTML5 would be the best possible way to build applications for the iPhone, they quickly learned the error of their ways and went all in on native apps and their new App Store, where anyone could publish and install applications, as long as they followed Apple's rules and you paid Apple's fees and you gave Apple their percentage of your revenue. At the time, this was such a novel idea that the 30% cut Apple would take wasn't that suspicious. It was not too far off from the cut physical stores would take. But what it enabled in terms of distribution, in terms of potential reach, was unreal. Never before had an independent developer been able to build a quick app like Flappy Bird and go viral overnight and make millions of dollars. But on the other side, there was no other way to do it because Apple had made sure that apps on the App Store couldn't install apps themselves and that you as a user couldn't install a different app store. They went all in on their walled garden. The idea that apps on an iPhone come from Apple's store and have to be approved by Apple. They went so hard on this that a whole culture of jailbreaking happened, where people started hacking their phones just to install custom software. While a lot of this was for random tweaks like notifications, which yes, notifications weren't a thing yet, a lot of it was also just apps Apple didn't like Wi-Fi scanning apps or emulators for old game consoles. Apple wasn't interested in these applications for a lot of reasons, from liability to potential risk for their users, and chose to lock down the App Store. On top of that, that 30% cut got more and more aggressive over time, not in how much they took, it stayed 30, but the amount of places where you run into that, especially in a world with both microtransactions and subscription fees. If I am using Spotify on my computer and I'm paying $15 a month and I put in my credit card number and they're processing the payment through something like Stripe, they're losing at most 1 to maybe 3% of that transaction to those fees. If I was to subscribe to the exact same Spotify through my iPhone using the app I downloaded from the App Store, Apple takes 30% of that. That's a maximum 3% to a 30% change. That is a 10x increase in the cut from if I roll my own payment infra versus I use the thing that the iPhone provides with the App Store. So there's an obvious solution here, right? Just don't use Apple's in-app payments, use your own. Well, Apple doesn't let you. If you are accepting payments for digital goods in your mobile application, and that mobile application is on an iPhone, you are doing your payments through Apple. There isn't another option. They don't let you do other options. For physical goods, like things you buy through Uber or things that you're purchasing on Amazon that get shipped to you, or services, you can still process payments yourself. But as soon as those become digital goods, Apple wants their hands on it. They want their 30%. A quote that came out of one of these hearings that I think about almost every day is the concept of how some developers are effectively subsidizing other developers on the App Store. If you're Bank of America, and you want to ship an app to your iPhone users, you pay the fees for your developers to be able to build the app, and then you publish it. And since your app doesn't have microtransactions, since you're not charging for your app, since you're not doing things that are selling digital goods, you will never have to pay Apple another cent. Despite this multi-billion-dollar corporation using Apple's infrastructure, going through their app reviews, costing Apple money every day, they're only paying Apple $100 times their number of developers per year. They're not paying any more than that. If you compare this to any game dev ever that might be charging $10 to download their game or might have a $5 skin you can buy in a free-to-play game, Apple takes 30% of all of those fees. This means that indie game devs are effectively subsidizing giant companies like Bank of America when you're using the App Store. That's crazy. And Apple's structure here honestly sucks. And I'm saying this as a huge Apple fanboy. I defend them more than almost anybody. I can even defend the mouse. Yes, the port on the bottom of the mouse was a good design decision. Tell me in the comments that I'm wrong, so I'll make a video about it because I'm right. Anyways, I think it's absurd that these small developers are the ones who are often hit the hardest by these 30% cuts. And crazy stuff like Netflix not letting you sign up in the app because they don't want to lose that 30%. It's absurd that we're at that point. Apple won't even let you put a button in the app or instructions that says, oh, you can't sign up here. If you want to sign up, do it on our website. They have been awful about all of this. So awful that Epic decided to challenge it. If you're not already familiar with Epic's history around revenue splitting, there's a lot here. Epic got in some trouble a few years ago for introducing their new game store, the Epic Game Store. It's a competitor to Steam. Why was this controversial? Why are people mad that there's a new alternative? Well, gamers kind of suck. There's going to be a theme throughout this that we'll get back to in a bit. The problem was that Epic Game Store didn't offer much in terms of new features. It just offered a better split for developers. If you publish a game on Steam, Valve takes 30%. Publish a game on Epic, Epic takes 12%. That's 1/3 the size of cut. And if that game happens to be Unreal Engine, they actually shave their 3% fee off that too. So it ends up being an effective 9% cut. That's crazy. That's so much better. One of the reasons they did this is they want to help game devs be more successful so they can make more games, make better games, and obviously have more needs for Epic's tools. It makes perfect sense. And that's why Epic Game Store was so focused on the game developers, not on the game players. Because I don't think anyone expected the game players to be as mad that they don't have a shopping cart as they were. Absolutely absurd. So, what happened with the iPhone? What happened with the Google Play Store? Well, here's where things get interesting. Epic, despite building a better game store, also had to fight the same 30% cut as everyone else. When they had Fortnite V-Bucks on their iPhone app, as well as the Android app, as well as all the other consoles, Apple took 30% every time you bought V-Bucks in the app. And while Epic could eat that cost, there's a lot of companies that can't. A lot of companies get hurt really hard by those things. When you have all this context, I think the next series of events makes much more sense. Because there was one fateful day where Epic, out of nowhere, allowed you to put a credit card number into the Fortnite app and immediately buy V-Bucks without having to go through Apple. And they actually gave you like 10 to 20% more V-Bucks if you did that. You got a nice discount. The reason they did that was because it was cheaper for them to process the payment themselves. Setting up Stripe is really easy. Dealing with Apple is expensive and obnoxious. And this is where things fell apart. Because as we all now know, it's strictly against both Apple's and Google's terms to process payments separate from how they do it, unless it's a physical good or service. So Apple jumped on this immediately, and not only did they remove Fortnite from the App Store, they actually disabled all of Epic's developer accounts and even their Macs. So a bunch of Epic employees were unable to sign in and do their jobs because of how huffy Apple was about this one-off attempt to get around their 30% fee. Absolutely absurd. Epic came prepared though, and they made what I consider one of the greatest response videos of all time.
Today, we celebrate the anniversary of the platform unification directives. For years, they have given us their songs, their labor, their dreams. In exchange, we have taken our tribute, our profits, our control. This power is ours and ours alone. We shall prevail.
Fucking legendary. They had this video already made before they did the change to Fortnite because they knew what was coming. They knew just how pissed off Apple was going to be when this happened. And they responded by taking Apple's famous 1984 ad where they're calling out IBM for being anti-consumer by pointing out that Apple's doing the exact same thing. This is such a poignant, legendary moment where they tanked a multi-billion-dollar year revenue driver for them, which was Fortnite on iPhone, and they let it die to make this point. So I'm not as dressed up as usual. It's my day off, but I just found a tweet that I really wanted to add into the video quick. Take a look at this. It's actually from 3 years ago, where Tim Sweeney was first bringing up just how bad Google's 30% cut was. I was barely on Twitter at this time, but even then, Tim Sweeney still replied to me when I asked how he felt about Apple's cut compared to Google's, and sure as hell, he jumped in and said Apple's cut is bad too. And funny enough, someone else replied saying, pull Fortnite from the App Store then. Little did he know. Anyways, so why are they being so willing to just eat this potential profit? Like, why would a company ever throw away billions of dollars of potential revenue? Well, there's two reasons for this. The first reason is Tim Sweeney is based. I'm a bit of a fanboy, but he owns exactly 51% of Epic, so no one can override him. I see a lot of people upset that Tencent, a Chinese company that is largely Chinese government, owns a percentage of Epic. They bought it so they could distribute Fortnite in China with like a Switch package that they really wanted to sell with Nintendo. They didn't buy it so they could make a bunch of decisions to control Epic. They couldn't make any decisions really because Tim Sweeney still owns too much of the company. He owns the majority voting shares. No one can override him. The other reason is the bet Tim Sweeney's are making from day one. They don't want to make a bunch of money off of games. They want to empower game developers to make more money themselves, knowing that will eventually trickle down to them. They were willing to sacrifice their single most profitable thing, which was Fortnite on the iPhone, in order to help developers potentially make more money in the future. That is a massive ballsy move, and Epic deserves a lot of credit for doing it, for tanking such a valuable IP, for letting Fortnite perform way worse. It's such an impactful game just losing half of its market share in one day because they wanted to make a goddamn point. And they made that point. Sadly, the Apple lawsuit with Epic didn't go great. Epic lost their case with Apple. There were some good rulings within it and some important statements. Specifically, the district judge, Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers, said that her ruling was required measured changes to Apple's rules. The actual meaning of the wording has been disputed. I'm trying to find it in here. The ruling was that Apple can no longer bar developers from providing buttons or links in their apps that direct customers to other ways to pay outside of Apple's own in-app purchase system. And this was a huge ruling. The issue was the wording of the ruling saying buttons or links meant that Apple could pick one they support and not support the others, as Apple interpreted it. So you still cannot have a button that brings you externally, but you can have a link at a certain font size that doesn't look like a link. And that's how Apple has chosen to enforce it, which is just absolute bullshit. So again, Judge Rogers, relatively based. You don't charge Wells Fargo, right? Or Bank of America, but you're charging the gamers to subsidize Wells Fargo. Yeah, that's what's happening. Apple is effectively making gamers and game developers subsidize these big banks and other companies. Just absolute absurdity. I understand this notion that somehow Apple brings the customers to the users, but after that first time, after that first interaction, the developers are keeping the customer with the games. Apple's just profiting off of that, it seems to me. And Apple's response to try and smooth this out was their new $1 million small business program where they cut their revenue split down to 15% until you've hit $1 million in revenue, and then it goes back up to 30. But you have to apply and you have to qualify. So it's not a guarantee. You don't just get this until you hit $1 million in revenue. This is the most bullshit. Oh, by the way, guys, they could get away with. And honestly, if this was just default, and even better, if they cut it down to 5 or 3% fees instead, that would have actually been kind of based, and I wouldn't have anywhere near as strong of a leg to stand on here. But Apple's capability and insistence on fucking over not just the big guys, but also the small guys and the medium guys, and making sure everyone gets screwed at once here is truly impressive. While I am frustrated that Apple's lawyers were good enough to talk their way through this, I'm thankful not everyone's lawyers are that good. Specifically Google's. Google's lawyers are not very good, as we've seen in lots of cases. And in this case in particular, Google's lawyers kind of bombed and they lost. The Epic versus Google Play Store antitrust case was ruled in favor of Epic. This is a groundbreaking ruling. Let's read through the verdict form. When answering the following questions and filling out the verdict form, please follow the directions provided throughout the form. Your verdict must be unanimous. Yes, unanimous verdict. This went to a jury. Huge. Question number 1. Did Epic prove, by a preponderance of the evidence and in accordance with the instructions given to you, the existence of a relevant antitrust market? Yes. If you answered yes to question 1, please specify each relevant product market and associated geographical market that Epic proved. Relevant product market. 1. Android app distribution market. 2. Android in-app billing services for digital goods and services transactions. Relevant geographic markets, worldwide excluding China, for both. When asked the question of, is Google monopolizing these markets, the jury agreed unanimously that Google is indeed fully owning these markets in monopolistic ways. And question 3 really enforces this by asking, did Epic prove by a preponderance of evidence that Google willfully acquired or maintained monopoly power by engaging in anti-competitive conduct in any of these markets? Yes. Question 4, if you answered yes to question 3, please specify each relevant product market. And again, they wrote the exact same thing because, yeah, here we are. Question number 5. If you answered yes to question 3, did Epic prove by preponderance of evidence that it was injured as a result of Google's violation of antitrust laws? Yes. They're not on the App Store because of it. Did Epic prove by preponderance of evidence that Google entered into one or more agreements that unreasonably restrained trade in relevant markets? Yes. Which of these markets? All of them. If you answered yes, please, relevant markets, same thing again. If you answered yes, did Epic prove that they were injured? Yes. Did Epic prove that Google unlawfully tied the use of the Play Store to the use of Google Play billing? Yes. Did they prove they were injured? Yes. There you go. They won. Google's going to try this again, so be ready for that. This win doesn't mean Google's store has fallen, but it does represent a huge, huge bit of progress. For the first time, we now have court precedent of an App Store monopoly being illegal. That is huge. This court case is going to be cited for a really long time and is the opening of the floodgates for a future where we don't just have one app store on our platforms. This can enable a level of innovation we haven't seen in a long time, and this can fundamentally change the way developers make money and build software. I'm really excited for the result of this hearing, and I am so hyped Epic took the time, money, and massive both brand and financial hits to make it possible. And while we did lose Fortnite on the iPhone, what we've gained is a potentially much more open future. So thank you, Epic, for continuing to use Fortnite as your bargaining chip to challenge the way we do things. You've really changed the industry, and I appreciate y'all immensely. Let me know why you hate me for supporting a company that isn't Valve in the comments. I'm sure you have lots of thoughts. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace, nerds.